Welcome back. Still talking about the New Testament period, the Gospels, and Herod the Builder, who built all over Palestine. Of course, one of his crowning achievements was the construction of the temple in Jerusalem. And so I just have some images here, some text here that relates to Jerusalem in this New Testament period, the Jerusalem of Herod and of then into the time of Jesus. So let's take a look at this. Here you see the Temple Mount. This is the Dome of the Rock, and this is the Temple Platform. Down here is the Western Wall. Some people call it the Wailing Wall. It's where Jews would come to pray today. And you can see, in fact, several of them lined up here. This is the men's side over here. This is the women's side here. And so these blocks, these bottom blocks, are actually part of the retaining wall of the Temple to Jerusalem. Of course, none of the temple remains. And pretty close to the site of where the temple sat, it may be a little over this way, is the Dome of the Rock. And of course, this is connected with Islam. This is Jerusalem is the third holiest city to Muslims, after Mecca, number one, Medina, number two, Jerusalem, number three. In fact, before Mecca, the people of Mecca converted to Islam, Muslims prayed towards Jerusalem. And they believe that Muhammad visited here somewhat miraculously, I guess we'd say, and from here ascended into heaven, and then went back to Arabia, all in one night. So this is part of the reason why this is such a the rock that's there is where he said he ascended from. Well, Herod the Great, as you probably know his story a bit. He's an Idumean, so he's the Idumeans, people from the south, were recent converts to Judaism, and therefore were not fully accepted by them. He was granted control over Galilee by Mark Antony. And so we see that one thing about Herod, he was pretty loyal to the Romans. He knew, as they used to say, which side his bread was buttered. And whatever Roman leader was around, whether it be Julius Caesar, Mark Antony, later Augustus Caesar, he will be very loyal to them. And that's really why he's in power. As his title, this book says, King of the Jews and Friend of the Romans. I think that sums it up pretty well. So he had to gain the control of Jerusalem by force, and Augustus granted him rule over Judea, Samaria, and Galilee. He dies in 4 BC, and of course this is important to try to date the birth of Jesus to the death of Herod. So there's been a lot of work on that we will not talk about right now. Herod the Builder built more than 20 sites in Israel, including some that we have other presentations about: Caesarea, Herodian, Masada. We mentioned Jericho, Machaerus, Heshbon, Sepphoris. 13 sites. You might be surprised to know that 13 sites are not even in Palestine, Israel area. They're around the Mediterranean, as far away as Tyre, Antioch, Byblos, even some up in the Aegean. So he was quite a builder and trying to make a name for himself. We have a lot of sources about Herod. Of course, New Testament mentions Herod, but probably our main source would be Josephus, in various books that Josephus has written. And also, we have lots of archaeological evidence. Josephus, of course, an important source for us in the New Testament, Roman era. Josephus is an interesting guy. He was at one time a Jewish general during the Jewish revolt, and he ends up holding a fortress, and like at Masada that we mentioned, the people there decide to commit suicide, and so the order goes out. Everybody does, pretty much, except the last guy standing is Josephus. He does not commit suicide, and he actually goes and surrenders. He surrenders himself. Vespasian is there, and when he comes in the presence of Vespasian, he says, "I'm coming in the presence of the next emperor." The Romans were we might call it superstitious, but Vespasian shortly thereafter will be called to be emperor, and therefore Josephus earns a special place in the court of Vespasian, and that's what keeps him in food and so forth, while he writes all his various works that he will write. Um, and so he writes four main works, and this is why, of course, the Jews hate him. Many Jews hate him. They hate Josephus because they feel he sold them out, which I think it's hard to say he didn't. And so he will write then one about his life, Vita, Contra Appione, which is really more of sort of theological work, you might say, basically against Appian or Appione, about why Judaism is an ancient religion. And then the Jewish wars and the antiquities. Here's a map that shows you Palestine under Herod the Great. You see all this area surrounded by the green is area which Herod controlled. And over here is the region of the Decapolis. A lot of the cities and towns are here, including you see Herodian, Machaerus, that we have presentations about them as well. And of course, Caesarea out here along the sea. Map in your textbook gives you a nice clear view of where these sites are, so I won't say more about it. You can look at it there. Here in the north, various sites connected with him: Caesarea, Ptolemais, Tyre, Sebaste, which is Old Testament Samaria, and in the south, Ashkelon, for example, Masada, Machaerus, Jericho. That Bethany beyond the Jordan is right in this area here. Not connected with Herod, but we have another presentation about that. And then here are some of his places outside of Judea. Of course, along the coast here, from Ptolemais all the way up to Antioch of Syria, but on the island of Chios and Neapolis and so forth. So he really, in Rhodes, he really does build. This record of him being the builder is true. This shows us what is typically called Herodian architecture or Herodian construction. These are large blocks. He has very large blocks, say in Jerusalem there near the temple. And then they have these bosses. You see how they're recessed here around the edges. That gives it a really nice look, I think. You know, a very finished look and very precisely made. You see how tightly they are together. I mean, this is fine worked stuff. And here you can see some of them in a wall, and they really stand out. They're large blocks and these recessed edges, and you can really tell the area that is from the time of Herod. And of course, he rebuilds the entire temple. Here's some more. You see the seam in the eastern wall where you've got Herodian construction and other construction. It really stands out. The seam then is probably the end of the pre-Herodian eastern wall, as you can see here. Those Herodian stones are bossed or embossed. And here is really nice. Some of the largest ones, these are actually not outside anymore. They are under. You can see. You got to go down. Look how large these are. 12 meters by 3 meters by 4 meters. So you know, a meter is over a yard. So this would be over 36 feet, almost 40 feet long, and about 10 feet by roughly 13, 14 feet. So some of these would have weighed as much as 400 tons. Here's some more of them here. And here's some features. This is from your textbook as well, that shows some of the circular architecture, just comparing the Herodian, for example, with Hadrian's library or villa, and other places where Herod is right in line with Roman architecture. Now here's a view looking to the west. This is taken from the Mount of Olives, and here we see the Dome of the Rock on this side. the temple would have been closely into this area here. And there would have been an entranceway up this way to get up to the top. And this would have been the courtyard of the Gentiles and so forth. And so there were actually multiple entrances this way and on the other side. Now here's a nice map that shows this from the New Testament time. You can see the court of the Gentiles. You can see the temple here. You see this. This is the fortress Antonia, which was basically the Romans had built this so that they could keep an eye on what was going on here without being in here. So you can study this map on the PowerPoint, and you can see the Kidron Valley, the Mount of Olives, a lot of things that relate, Bethany over here where Jesus would come this way into town. And the walls. You have to remember that the walls of Jerusalem were different in Roman times than they are today. Out here is the modern, I call them modern, they're Turkish walls, where, of course, Jesus would have been executed outside of the city walls and buried outside of the city walls. So this is a traditional site of his execution here. Although Golgotha, although some would place him at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So here's a nice, I think, clear map of it to show you the different walls. The present walls are in white. The green or that olive color there is from the New Testament times. The various pools that are mentioned during the New Testament, often in the Gospels as well, listed here. And here we see references to the temple, taking 46 years to build it, and so forth. So I'll let you study that on your own, but these are some of the dimensions of the temple itself. Now these are views just on there's the Mount of Olives over this way, and then this would be the southern end of past the temple. This would have been an entranceway, staircases that would have gone up and through sort of tunnels that would take you up to the top. A lot of excavation work's been done in this area for a long time. Here's a nice model that shows the Jerusalem as they believe it would have looked in the New Testament period. So here's the temple, here's the walls, and so forth. And then what this does is it focuses your attention. This is Herod's palace over here in Jerusalem, very elaborate palace, and then here's the temple that he built. Of course, he would have been on the west side. The wealthy people in most Roman cities lived on the west side. They lived on the west side because of the prevailing winds. The wind would typically come from the west, and that means that you would get the cool breeze, and also if you lived on the east side, you would tend to get all the smell, smoke, and so forth of the city. So here is his palace with fountains and pools and so forth. And here the upper city with the fancy homes on the west side. And then of course here is the temple itself and the fortress Antonia that the Romans used. Paul is taken here. Paul's taken here when he is arrested. Here's the fortress Antonia. They would use this to watch down into the temple. They could see what was going on in the temple precinct without actually being there from these towers. Other drawings of the temple. This is again that model showing you the valley in between, near the temple. And up here you see the towers of Herod's palace. Each one was named. Now here's a modern view of the city. So you can see the Dome of the Rock would be to the right, and this would be the Al-Aqsa Mosque and Mount Zion over here. I've spent some time in Jerusalem. Longest period I spent there was about a month. And I lived on Mount Zion for that month. But I've been there several times. It's a wonderful place to visit. It really is. Here's an inscription that was found, and the inscription here it says to the place of the trumpeting, and it was discovered during the Tsar his excavations, and this was from the southwest corner of the temple itself. The priest would stand and blow the trumpet to begin and end the Sabbath day. And Josephus talks about it here. I'll let you read that. And here's an ossuary. Ossuaries are used for burial, especially around Jerusalem for Jews. What this would be is it would be a secondary burial. You would bury the person in a coffin in a tomb. When you bury a person, if you don't preserve them as we do, we pump people full of a lot of chemicals, which basically preserves them pretty well for quite a while. If you don't do that, however, a body will last about a year, not even quite a year, but in a year later you can come back and pretty much it's all bones. Once that would happen, then they would basically, as a sort of recycling burial spots, they would then take the person's bones and put them in a bone box, an ossuary, as you see here, and they would put their name on it. And then this would be, about 18 inches, roughly 18 inches, because it only has to be as long as your longest bone, and your longest bone is your the top part of your leg, right, from your hip down to your knee. And for most people, 18 inches is plenty of room for that. So they're about 18 to 20 inches long, and then they're not very wide. They're probably about a foot wide, let's say, and they would fit all the bones in there, the whole person, and then they would put that in the tomb, and then they could lay out another relative in the spot where you had been, or your other relative had been, Uncle Frank and Aunt Susie could be in the same spot. Okay, so and then after a year you could put her bones in a box. So this is a very common way to do it, and it preserves a lot of space, burial space. Here's a mikvah, or mikvaot, or plural. A mikvah is a ritualistic bath of purification that the Jews would do. You can read about the fact, be unclean, you're to wash. And so certainly during this period they made pretty elaborate baths. It has to have running water in it. And so they would sometimes find unique ways to be able to have the running water. They would have two pools, and they would pull a container out of one, and it would move from one pool to the other, and move from the other pool back to it. Because sometimes it's very difficult to have running water, but this is how they would do it. So you need to cleanse yourself before you go up to the temple. Here's the western wall, or Wailing Wall. We talked about that. They would come here to pray, and in fact, they would insert little prayers into the cracks of the wall. So the Wailing Wall, or Western Wall, the outer western temple, is where traditionally, especially Jews and tourists do it as well, would go there to pray, and it measures about 50 meters wide, 20 meters high. Okay. Here's a model. There's an outdoor model of Jerusalem. It's really nice to visit if you can. It's now located, used to be located near a hotel, but now it's located near the Shrine of the Book and the Israel Museum. They moved the whole thing. It's constructed out of stone, and it's a scale model of Jerusalem in the time of Herod, 1:50 scale model. It's really a pretty neat thing to see. So this is that model, and it shows you the three towers of Herod's palace and their names. Here's the Fortress Antonia from the model, and another view of the temple. Here's the temple here, and the fortress towers here. And here is the temple itself and the temple precinct. And in the background, this is actually taken when it was at the Holy Land Hotel East, and now it's been moved. But it had nice backgrounds there because you could see the hills of Jerusalem in the distance. And here you see a Nephilim. You see a giant right over here. At least that's what I call because as the people would circle around it, you'd have to pay a fee. Go to this hotel and pay a fee. You could go in and see it. So here's some of the Nephilim here, right? But this has all been moved now over to the Israel Museum. Anyway, looking right into the Holy of Holies there, the temple enclosure. Again, another map of Jerusalem. This is the eastern gate, or the gate called Beautiful or Golden Gate. See, it's all blocked up. This used to be another way up to the temple. Aerial view, that's not that great. But underneath now, there are places where you can get down to the original pavement of the Roman period. Sisters of Zion Convent has these down here, and these do date to the Roman period. And so a lot of tour groups go here, and you can see the striations in the streets. This would have been street level in New Testament period. Some guys dressed up as Roman soldiers out in the courtyard, and this is their picture of what the temple would have looked like at that time. Here's another with the fortress here. And here is the Al-Aqsa Mosque and this southern end, where there's been a lot of excavation work being done here. With entryways that would have been made this way. And here you can see the springer to an arch that would have been a bridge across the valley. People could have walked across this bridge and then come up to the Temple Mount as well. And of course, this is the way it looks fairly recently. A lot of security to get in here. You got to go through here now. And security, and then to get up to the top, you've got to go through metal detectors and things to wind your way as visitors to go up here, and then back underneath here in this area, men can go back in there, and then there's Orthodox Jews are back in this area. Here's that southern area again, and you can see the Mount of Olives on this side. And here is the Wailing Wall, as it's called, or the Western Wall. You can see the cracks in the stones. You can see the Herodian blocks. People put their prayers on little pieces of paper and stuff them in there. And in fact, there is a place, I think it's still around, where you can ask that a prayer be put there, of course, for a fee. And they will supposedly go and do it. I don't know if they actually do it or not, but they will take your money. And here's another view of it from a distance. Another view. Now this is back underneath this area here, where you can go. I took a picture back in there. I don't know if you're really supposed to, but I did. And you can see they keep Torah books back here. And they do a lot of bar mitzvahs in this area, and it's sort of the primo thing to do, is to go and have your bar mitzvah. Say if you're from New York, you come here to Jerusalem and they book it for the whole family. So another view of the eastern end, taken from the Mount of Olives. Okay, we'll end it there. Have a good day.